Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Carrie. In this past semester, I was a member of Dr. Pat O'Donnell's Honors English Seminar, which is 492H. And for my final project, I'm just going to take this opportunity to address you, hypothetical future students of this course, into what you should expect, what you should look for, and just sort of a general overview of what I enjoyed, what I took away from it, because it is finals week of spring semester 2017, so we've covered it all, and now it's just time to wrap it all up before the summer. So this is an honors seminar, as I'm sure you're aware by now, and you probably have a small class like mine. My class was about 10 people, and most classes are just discussion or film screenings, which was really cool. So just kind of a brief overview of the semester, looking at the syllabus. It was almost always read something, watch something, and the three people who were really the cornerstones of the course were Patricia Highsmith, Henry James, and Alfred Hitchcock. So those were the three writers slash directors whose work we primarily focused on, and then we had a couple outside sources that were more contemporary, one of them being Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. So for the remainder of this vlog, I'm going to walk you guys through like how our course was structured, it was structured into 3 threads, and my format will be talk about the thread and then share an exemplary scene or passage, but I'm going to try my very hardest to stay away from spoilers because I know that that can be really frustrating to have a book or movie ruined before you even read it, and honestly most of these are very suspenseful things that have surprising ends, so I don't want to give anything away. So just a quick introduction to the 3 threads of the course. The first one was a doubling and identification thread. The second one was the making of a woman thread, and the third was conspiracy and paranoia. And so let's just get right into it, and we'll start with doubling and identification. So when we were studying the first thread, which is doubling and identification, the works we looked at were The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, and Highsmith's Strangers on a Train. And today, for this vlog and these purposes, I want to share with you 2 examples from the 2 Strangers on a Train, because that is where doubling was the most obvious, probably, for everything we read this semester. So first, I would like to share an image with you. And this image, I think, is really exemplary of the doubling relationship that is set up between Guy and Bruno. And in the film, in this shot, how Guy's on one side of the gate and Bruno's on the other, the camera goes on either side of the gate, so both men at each time look as if they're behind bars, and it just looks they're exactly across from each other. So it's a very good visual way of seeing that this is doubling. And now a passage from Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. This is toward the end of the book, and it's Bruno speaking. Oh no, that's too simple. Women were really so crude sometimes. People, feelings, everything, double, 2 people in each person. There's also a person exactly the opposite of you, the unseen part of you, somewhere in the world, and he waits in ambush. It thrilled him to say Guy's words, though he hadn't liked hearing them, he remembered, because Guy had said the 2 people were mortal enemies too, and Guy had met him and himself. So in this passage, there's a whole bunch to work with in terms of doubling. So first, Bruno explicitly says double, so that is what cued me to it. Next, 2 people in each person. So that is one thing we discussed a lot about Guy and Bruno, is that Bruno is kind of the personification of Guy's internal, deep, dark desires, and that's projected out into another human being. And then that is sort of similar later in the passage, because Guy had said the 2 people were mortal enemies too, and we do see that enemyship form between Guy and Bruno. So this is just one passage of many that discusses doubling, but I decided to pick this one because Bruno's acknowledging the fact that he and Guy are doubles in a way, and a lot of the other passages are more context based, and I didn't have the time or space in this vlog to get into that, but once you get to know each character, both in seeing and in reading, it's easy to pick up on how they are very similar and, like Bruno said, exact opposites, and how doubling works in that. So the next thread we got to about a third of the way through the semester was the Making of a Woman thread, and the readings and viewings for that were Daisy Miller by Henry James, Vertigo by Hitchcock, The Price of Salt by Highsmith, and Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. So for this vlog, my examples will be from Vertigo and Gone Girl, because those were two of my favorite things we studied this semester and actually what I wrote my midterm essay on, so I feel kind of a little bit of expertise there. So Vertigo, for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm going to be as mysterious as I can when explaining the context of how it fits in this thread, because I think it's probably my favorite Hitchcock film that we watched in class and that I've watched on my own, and it's so full of twists and turns that I couldn't have seen it coming, so I know that other people probably are in the same boat, so I'm going to be very cautious. But there is one specific scene of a man constructing a woman in his exact image of what he wants. So that's an explicit way of literally making a woman. He makes over her hair, he makes over her clothes, he makes over her demeanor, her makeup, everything about her to fit the image of his perfect woman. And then there are a few other examples of making women in Vertigo, but that example is the clearest one I can give without giving away too many spoilers. So that's the first thing to think about when it comes to making women. So another example of how women are constructed in the literature of this thread is in Gone Girl, which there's a ton of constructing of women, specifically of just Amy, in this book. And if you haven't seen it or read it or seen it, again, lots of suspenseful twists and turns, so I'm going to be cautious of that. But about halfway through, Amy says, "Nick loved me, a 6-0 kind of love. He loved me, but he didn't love me. Nick loved a girl who didn't exist. I was pretending the way I often did, pretending to have a personality. I can't help it, it's what I've always done. The way some women change fashion regularly, I change personalities." So this is key in thinking about Amy's character, because one of the things about Amy is that she constructs herself, much like the two characters in Vertigo I talked about. One is constructing the other. Amy constructs herself to please the person she's trying to please. So later down here, about a paragraph later, she says, "That night at the Brooklyn party, I was playing the girl who was in style, the girl a man like Nick wants, the cool girl." So we get the context here of when she met Nick, how she was purposely changing herself, constructing herself in the way that she perceived he wanted her to be. And I referenced this specific page in my essay about the construction of women so many times because it is the page I think has the most stuff there about how Amy constructs herself. So first she admits that she changes personalities, admits to playing a role the night she got Nick, and then going on to say that women do this. They pretend to be this girl that men want. And one of the best parts, I think, is at the end of this page and onto the next. They're not even pretending to be the woman they want to be. They're pretending to be the woman a man wants them to be. So I think that really sums up her idea of this cool girl, which comes back over and over again, just the same as the construction of women is sort of an underlying theme in Gone Girl. And the third and final thread of the semester was the conspiracy/paranoia thread. And the things we read and watched for this were The Beast in the Jungle by Henry James, Rear Window by Hitchcock, and The Talented Mr. Ripley by Highsmith, and we also watched The Talented Mr. Ripley film version. So, my two examples from this thread, I actually have multiple examples, all from The Talented Mr. Ripley, because I think it's just the most perfect example. The perfect text to look at when thinking about, especially paranoia. So, this book is by Patricia Highsmith again. I would say it's up there in my favorite things we read this semester. So, my first example, very conveniently, is on page 1, and it's the very first paragraph. Tom glanced behind him and saw the man coming out of the green cage, heading his way. Tom walked faster. There was no doubt the man was after him. Tom had noticed him 5 minutes ago, eyeing him carefully from a table, as if he weren't quite sure, but almost. He had looked sure enough for Tom to down his drink in a hurry, pay, and get out. So already, we're set up with a character named Tom who thinks someone's following him. And that, I think, is the most perfect way Highsmith could have started this book, because, as you'll see in a moment, there are just a huge number of examples of Tom thinking someone is plotting against him, thinking someone's tricking him, thinking someone's out to get him, and it's really just all in his head. It's like his manifestation of guilt. So that's my first example from The Talented Mr. Ripley. Another example from this book, a little more than halfway through, is Tom's on the Run, of course, again. So, Tom straightened up suddenly from a suitcase. Could it all be a trick, really? Were they just letting him have a little more rope and letting him go to Sicily, apparently unsuspected? A sly little bastard, that officer. He'd said his name once. What was it? Ravini? Ravarini? Well, what could be the advantage of letting him have a little more rope? He'd told them exactly where he was going. He had no intention of trying to run away from anything. All he wanted was to get out of Rome. He was frantic to get out. He threw the last items into his suitcase and slammed the lid down and locked it. So right here, he's just traveling, and he gets permission to travel. And this pattern of him overthinking something as innocuous as just permission from the police to travel, he views as them tricking him into actually being onto him. So again, like I said before, this pattern of Tom overthinking everything to the point where anything, even if it's positive, can be interpreted as people out to get him, is just exemplary of what happens in this book and with this character. So I hope that through these passages and me kind of talking you through how they fit within the threads, you can see kind of what you're getting in for this semester, especially if Dr. O'Donnell keeps the same syllabus and reading materials. I know that we did have some shifting this year just within our own year, so I can imagine it shifting. But overall, this class was full of fun things to read and watch. And I think one thing we discussed toward the end is that just about every single thing we read and watched can fit into each of these threads, which I think I might have given away in one of my earlier examples, but I was trying not to. But that was one of the fun things to discover, is that The Talented Mr. Ripley might have a ton of paranoia in it, but so does Strangers on a Train, and I think these books are actually like doubles of each other. They're so similar. So that goes back to the first thread. And then women are constructed in both, and there's definitely a lot of paranoia and conspiracy in Gone Girl, and again with the James and the Hitchcock, it's just everything fits into everything, and that's very, very cool to see. But I think another thread or theme or trope, whatever you want to say, that encompasses everything we read also and watched is suspense, and I know I said that a few times. The movie, the film, or the book was suspenseful, but I think I wrote that in all my notes for everything we read this semester. Even the more, not suspenseful things like Daisy Miller, there was still that little bit of suspense going on the whole time. So that just made the class more enjoyable, because suspense just generally makes things more enjoyable to read. It makes things go faster, and paying attention to what is causing that suspense is something that fascinated me throughout the entire semester. So I hope that watching this, hopefully not too long vlog, was a nice informal way to introduce you to some of the things you'll be seeing, some of the things to look out for throughout your 492H journey, and I wish you all the best. Thanks for watching.